So today is a sermon in our theme this month of ancestors, and one strand of our tradition is Universalism. And so we'll be doing a bit of history and a bit of pondering. I'm guessing you know the way that the thinking goes. Some of us, the ones who live right, will find our way to eternal salvation. Those of us who don't adhere to a set of rules find ourselves facing eternity in a state of torture. I imagine you've seen, as I have, images from the painting Garden of Earthly Delights, completed sometime around 1500 by Hieronymus Bosch. The images of hell, of people being tortured, of distorted creatures, and desolation may have been enough to encourage adherence to the teachings of the church. Maybe. It was a dark and violent interpretation, one that has echoed through centuries. Today, contemporary Christian evangelical theologians may differ on the particulars, but the idea of punishment in hell is still taught. In fact, over history and across cultures and religions, the notion of hell has persisted. In some cases, it wasn't as violent or tortuous as it was in more dominant depictions. When an idea appears in multiple cultures across time, it leaves me wondering what human need it's addressing. I can't be sure, but it seems to me that a combination of impulses is behind the idea of a heaven or hell afterlife. Of course, there's the understandable reluctance to believe that our loved ones are gone. And I think we all, at one time or another, have longed for a world that makes sense, where people who do terrible things do not prosper, and good people would not have bad things happen to them. There's a logic here, maybe not one that you agree with, but I can kind of understand where it came from. I remember being an earnest little Presbyterian kid. I was so earnest. I remember wondering a lot about heaven and hell. I was taught that admission to heaven was dependent on my being good and on believing in Jesus. And I worked hard on both. But there were some mixed messages there too, and I began to ask questions. It's a bit ironic that the Sunday school songs and lessons designed to help me become a good Christian sowed the seed for some of my wonderings. I remember singing a song, some of you may know it, Jesus loves the little children. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Now, as I said, I was earnest and found myself puzzling. If part of my weekly collection helped missionaries so that they could teach people in other places about Jesus and God, that meant that some of the little children of the world didn't know about Jesus. But that's not fair, I protested. Jesus loves them. And if the reason they can't go to heaven is that they don't know about Jesus, well, that's just not fair. And there was another song, too, we sang, one that had a lovely sentiment that seems to have stood in stark contrast to some of the teachings about the afterlife that I was being taught. The last verse of God Sees the Little Sparrow Fall is, God made the little birds and flowers and all things large and small. He'll not forget the little ones. I know he loves them all. Those messages stood in contrast to the other messages of judgment I was receiving. I was confused. It turns out I wasn't alone. Calvinism came to North America sometime in the early 1600s. It took the thinking about salvation and damnation to a new level. It taught that we arrived in this world with our fates already sealed. There was nothing we could do. It was all predetermined. The logic behind the teaching was that God was all-powerful, and that while humans had free will to make choices about their behavior, it would have no impact on the predestination that God had determined. Our free will is not more powerful than the great mystery of God. And that's where Universalism came in. In truth, the question about universalism was as old as the earliest Christian teachings. There had been councils and votes and more councils and meetings and creeds and revised creeds, all with the idea of establishing a standard Christian teaching. And in time, the notion that all people could be saved, admitted to heaven after death, was largely abandoned for a while. In North America, Jose Ballou, who was mentioned earlier, wrote a book, 1805, arguing that no sin is bigger than God's love. Later in the same century, Aidan Ballou, a nephew once or twice removed, began to consider the impact of this teaching on humans. The teachings of equity and justice of Jesus should be applied to social issues and policy, is what Aidan Ballou argued. Universalism became very popular in North America, particularly in rural areas. It's likely that Universalism first came to what we now call Canada in the first decade of the 19th century, around the same time that Jose Ballou was writing his book. And it was not until about 20 years later that there were enough Universalists in the region for loosely organized societies to form. Many of those connected with early Universalism had easy connections through family or geography with the US, where at that time about 3% of the population identified as Universalist. That's a lot of people. The earliest Universalist congregations in Nova Scotia can be dated to 1837, and it was also in 1837 that the first known Universalist congregation in Upper Canada, now Ontario, was founded, where the members of the congregation were, because of their American backgrounds, considered theological and political threats. Keep in mind, this isn't so far after some wars. Everywhere they organized, the Universalists found themselves on the receiving end of disdain of their neighbors. The 1837 annual report of the Brockville Bible Society notes concern about the prevalence of the anti-scriptural heresy of Universalism. In 1838, the Methodist paper in Nova Scotia reported, "We are sorry to perceive that a recent congregation is open whose system saps the very foundation of Christian holiness." In town, people murmured about the devil's work. In 1844, a Universalist group was founded here in Toronto. It was atypical in that it was in a more urban setting, and by the following year, when this congregation was founded, the Universalists blended in with them. But in spite of the suspicion of others, the movement grew. By the time the provincial censuses were taken in 1851, Universalism was able to claim more than 7,000 adherents in Canada. There's about 4,000 of us now. Well, that's a step down. Yet, because of the nature of settlement and the patterns of influence in Canada, almost all of those known Universalists were within 30 miles or enjoyed easy access to the US by sea, because Universalism did have American roots. There is no evidence of any formal grouping of Universalists in Canada west of Ontario, though we do know that Universalist ideas were sometimes part of the stories. In 1890, Magnus Skapetsson, a liberal Icelandic minister just outside Winnipeg, preached a controversial sermon that was Universalist in theology. He was expelled from the Lutheran Synod. And 5 other groups joined the Unitarians. The success was very short-lived, though. By 1891, the Canadian census indicates that the number of Universalists had decreased to only 1/4 of the 7,000 that had been identified 40 years earlier. There are reasons suggested for this decline. Perhaps it was several factors. As other Protestant traditions softened some of their teachings about hell and damnation, Universalism may have failed to offer a distinct message of salvation. More and more Canadians moved as the 19th century progressed into cities, and Universalism, which had been a faith of rural communities, didn't move with them. As the century progressed and Americans became less inclined to move to a British colony, the influx of Americans waned, and so there were fewer Universalists coming in. Though I will say it was about this time that Universalism began to drop off in the US too. But here, It's fair to say that Canada's changing social, political, and religious climate eroded the foothold that Universalism had enjoyed. By the time of the merger of the two traditions, I'm almost done with the history, in 61, the Unitarians and the Universalists joined together in 61. There were only 3 remaining congregations, Universalist congregations in Canada, and their combined membership was fewer than 70. In the 110 years since that 1851 census, membership had seen a 99% decline. Other than the Halifax congregation, which was the largest in the other 2 congregations, North Hatley and Olinda, were small rural communities and barely hanging on. It's interesting to me that the Halifax congregation still calls itself the Universalist Unitarian congregation. In a period of 150 years, Universalism in Canada had begun, peaked, and numerically at least all but died out. He sees the little sparrow fall. It meets his tender view. That idea is found in other traditions too. In one Torah portion, when the Hebrews were beginning to rejoice at the drowning of their enemies in the Red Sea, we read that the people were rebuked, God saying, "Why would you sing when my handiwork is drowning in the sea?" Mahayana Buddhism promotes a universal compassion towards all sentient beings and sees all beings as equally deserving of compassion. Those are universalist understandings. We are, as the teaching goes, all loved. We are all, in spite of our messy humanity, worthy of love. It was a coincidence that this teaching came on the same day as a baby dedication, but I couldn't be happier that it did. The heyday of Universalism is over, but the ideas persist, and for an increasing number of Canadians, Unitarians, the idea of universalism has become important in them shaping their own theological understanding. There's been a shift from otherworldly concerns to more immediate ones. As long ago as 1915, Clarence Skinner defined the primal question as how to turn this world into a kingdom of heaven. This world as a kingdom of heaven. I think for many of us, that's where our current relationship with universalism exists. Theists, agnostic, and atheists alike can all agree that we have a moral obligation to worry about justice and equity here and now. As we reflect today and consider the contemporary call to action, there are threads of earlier understandings. Reverend Gordon McKeeman wrote about basic universalism and suggested a powerful message of inclusiveness is part of our salvation, our collective salvation, as we grapple with issues, the environment, justice, global citizenship, and the economy. McKeeman believed we need to keep sharing the vision of universalism, and we need to keep doing the very hard work of living it. Universalism has often been romanticized as a simple faith, one that comforted more than it demanded. No doubt the idea of a God as a loving father has been a comfort to many. Perhaps God does see the falling sparrow with tenderness, but the song doesn't suggest that God acts in any way. If the sparrows are to be saved, if we are to be saved, we need to look to ourselves and each other to do it. As I see it evolving in Canadian Unitarian Universalism, I see a form of universalism that demands much and which does not fail to recognize the high stakes with which we are playing. You may or may not be a theist, but the idea of a God may hold meaning for you. St. Teresa of Avila, who wrote and lived in the 16th century, said that our hands, our feet, and our eyes are the ones here on earth. The concept of one world community, however appealing in the abstract, is far less so when it means equal treatment of one's immediate neighbors of every race, religion, class, political view, temperament, and nationality. In short, it's hard to love one's neighbor always and unconditionally, near and far. In fact, we, being the messy and imperfect beings we are, will fail at it. We will. We may not always seem lovable, but we are worthy of love. This is the aspiration that modern understandings of universalism challenge us with. holding ourselves responsible for one another, caring about the welfare of those beyond our close circles is making a theological statement. I know I do it imperfectly. I make mistakes. I will always make mistakes. But good communities like this one can help hold me accountable. They can remind me of our ideas and our ideals, our heritage of people who believed they were in a partnership with God, who loved the world, is one I'm happy to claim. There is work to do. There will always be work to do. I'm glad to do it with others who hold the ideals of loving, compassion, inclusion, and forgiveness. I'm so glad we're doing it together.